Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me so much pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of India Habitat Center and Professor Benoy K Behl. Today's talk is the 33rd in his monthly series, Glimpses of Culture. From 2001 till 2020, when the last Limca Book of Records was published, Professor Behl was each year given the record for being the most traveled photographer and art historian. For decades, he traveled to all corners of the country, often spending just one night at each location. Therefore, despite the vastness of the corpus of surviving Indian art, a journey through art history with him takes us to numerous places of significance, including those which are not well known to tourists. Many are not aware of the beauty and importance of the temples of Aihole, Badami, and even Pattadakal, even though it is a World Heritage Site. In the last few months, he has taken us to the earliest Indian art in the Indus Valley and Maurya periods. He also took us to the philosophic fundamentals of this art tradition, which were formulated by the 2nd century BCE. Today, he takes us to the earliest surviving large body of intact temples in India. These are in the valleys of the rivers Malaprabha and Tungabhadra in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. Ladies and gentlemen, Benoy K Behl speaks to us today on art of the early Chalukyas, a glorious period in the history of temple building. Over to him now, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sujata Chatterji. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A great pleasure to be with you to share some more treasures from India's vast uh, treasure of early art. Now, in the past few months, we have been to the roots of this art. We saw how it began in a unique culture, a culture in which archaeologists have not been able to find any evidence at all of any army or police. A uniquely peaceful culture, it seems. We saw later the development of the fundamentals of this art. We saw how this art brings before us the multiplicity of the forms of the world and directs our attention towards our search for that which is beyond all these forms, that which may be eternal, that which may be arupa without form, nirgun without qualities. We also saw how a little later in Indian art, beautiful, exquisite deities were formulated. Deities who were made very gracefully and beautifully. And by looking upon them, we responded. And in that response, we were transformed. We were transformed to that which is the best within ourselves. We were transformed to see the grace which underlies all that there is. Now, in the last month and the month before that, we visited sites in the eastern Deccan around the Amravati region, and we visited the western Deccan. We saw Ajanta, Elephanta, such absolutely beautiful caves. And we saw masterpieces of art which had been formulated in these locations. In fact, the Deccan was surely one of the very most prosperous places in the entire world. There was an enormous amount of trade. Now, What for? What was the secret of this? What is that put India on top of the world at that time in the first millennium? It was cotton. There was so much fine cotton that was growing across the entire vast region of the Deccan, and this was exported as excellent textiles. In the first century, we have Pliny the Elder writing in Rome that Roman coffers are being emptied for buying too many fine textiles from India. In the next century, we have Emperor Vesuvian saying practically the same thing. And in this prosperous region, we now come to the central part of the Deccan, a central part which has, in fact, the earliest surviving large body of temples. So here we see the evolution of the temple form, how structural temples came to be made in India. We see them taking shape. We see, in fact, experiments with shape. We see the earliest of these structural temples with an apsidal shape, a shape which goes back to the Chatterjis of the rock-cut caves of the Buddhist rock-cut caves of the Western India. In these rock-cut caves, obviously, the exterior could not be seen. But later, when we see these same Chatyagrahas being made structurally, for instance, in Andhra Pradesh, we see this apsidal shape from the exterior too. So here we see this, and we see other shapes, the North Indian temple shape, the South Indian temple shape, which are beginning to form. And it is indeed a very exciting time. This is also the time of another change. In ancient India, all temples, all monuments to all the faiths used to be patronized not by kings, but by the people. It was a unique tradition in this land where inscriptions and thousands of inscriptions across the whole country show that it is common people, it is fishermen, it is farmers, it is tailors, it is housewives who in fact patronized the making of parts, one part each of the structures which are the monuments of India. Now, in this period, gradually this will start changing. By the time we go into the period immediately after what we see today, in fact, kings will be directly patronizing the temples, and that will be a fundamental change. And we see this beginning to happen here too. You see, many royal families are involved already in the patronage of the art. And I will say no more for the present. And my many thanks to India Habitat Center for this yet again one more opportunity to share the beautiful art of India with you. And my thanks again to Doordarshan, who have been a wonderful public broadcaster, to have sponsored such serious research and such serious filmmaking in a day and age when people are so concerned with the commercial side of things and anything which is very entertaining, anything which gets TRP is normally what is patronized by TV setups. Doordarshan have very kindly sponsored over the years so many of my films on these absolutely serious subjects of art. My thanks to all of them. And I will now request Sunil to please run the film. Thank you.
The Chitra Sutra, the ancient Indian treatise on sculpture and painting, states that the purpose of art is to show us the grace which underlies all of creation, to help us on the path towards reintegration with the divine. From the 4th century onwards, the human form became the main embodiment of philosophic concepts. These exquisite forms were made to move us and to transport us beyond our worldly concerns to that which was more important. Temples were conceived as homes for the deity, where the formless eternal takes on a shape to give darshan to the devotee. Darshan is the transfer of grace which occurs when we look upon the beauty and harmony of the divine. Many temples were made in the Gupta period from the 4th to the 6th centuries AD. However, most were made of brick and have not survived. The earliest large body of well-preserved temples is of the period of the early Chalukyas from the 6th to the 8th centuries. These were made near the banks of the Malaprabha River in present-day Karnataka and on the Tungabhadra in Andhra Pradesh. The Chalukyas rose to power in the mid-6th century and made their capital at Badami. The earliest monument of their rule is the Ravan Padi cave at Aihole, not far from Badami. It was probably made around 550 AD and is dedicated to Shiva. The red sandstone cliffs of Badami offered a spectacular setting for the excavation of 4 caves, 3 Hindu and 1 Jaina. The largest and most impressive of these is Cave 3, dedicated to Vishnu. An inscription next to a Varaha depiction states that the cave was dedicated in AD 578 by Mangalesha, a brother of King Kirtivarman. Many Chalukyan monuments were patronized by members of the royal family. Stepping inside, we are transported to another world. Large figures of the forms of Vishnu are made in panels along the walls. We see a continuation of the sculptural styles of the rock-cut caves of the Western Deccan. However, the figures have become more slender. There is an elegance of the post-Gupta period and a distinct Chalukyan style is seen. Here Vishnu is seated in a posture of royal ease on the cosmic serpent Ananta, which means endless. Vishnu is seen in the Narasimha Avtara, part human and part lion. Pillars of the mandapa are elaborately carved with kirti mukhas and other motifs. Mithunas or loving couples represent the creative forces and the harmony of the natural order. The cave has surviving fragments of 6th century paintings which are extremely valuable as a record of the art of that time. It is known that the walls and ceilings of most early Indian monuments would have been fully painted. A distinctive feature of the caves and temples of this period are the elaborately carved ceiling panels, as we see in Cave 2 here. A panel of Ganas is made across the basement in front of the cave. The Varaha Avtara of Vishnu was the dynastic symbol of the Chalukyas. In this form, the Lord appears as a boar to rescue the earth goddess from being submerged in the ocean.
So I was first looking at the buildings, but very quickly I realized that the architecture could not be separated from its sculptural, its carved portions. Actually, the bulk of the carvings are inseparable from the buildings. And this integration, I would say, of carved figures and carved ornamentation, this decor of beautiful decorative motifs, is something which is, I think, the speciality of these monuments.
Cave 1 is dedicated to Shiva and is also of the mid-6th century. Projections of the rock face at right angles to the front of the cave continue the sculptural program. To the right of the entrance is a magnificent depiction of the Nataraja, Shiva in the cosmic dance. We see here the movement and the multiplicity of the world of creation, yet all held together in the great harmony of the natural order. The grace of the figure continues the styles which were established in the preceding century, in the Gupta period.
I think this warm and full-bodied sort of carving is something which is very special about early Chalukya art. It's a product, of course, of the soft sandstone that permits a very rounded way of modeling the figure. The expressions on the faces are rather otherworldly. You feel that however violent or however active the figures may be, the expressions are in another world.
There is a depiction of Durga as Mahishasur-mardani, when she kills the demon of ignorance in the form of a Mahisha or buffalo. The large buffalo appears like a toy in her hands. The region of the Malaprabha River in the Deccan was a meeting place of the styles of temple building which were developing in North and South India. While temples of other regions have been lost, examples are preserved here because little or no building has taken place in later times. Aihole is today a small village in a remote part of Karnataka state. Many of the temples here were used, until recently, as houses or cattle sheds and are known by the names of their former owners. For instance, the temple of Lad Khan, which was probably built around the end of the 6th century. An inscription states that it was dedicated to Durga. It has a large porch with fine figures carved on the pillars. Within is a simple square hall in which the windows create a striking effect. A Nandi, the bull on which Shiva rides, is a later addition. A small second story with sculptures of Shiva and Vishnu is part of the original conception. The Durga temple, most probably of the early 8th century, is apsidal in form. The shape is perennial, though not very common in Indian monuments. The temple also has a very unusual and open ambulatory around the sanctum, with pillars and no wall on the outside. There are splendid images of Shiva and Durga here. The quality of naturalism is striking. In the art of this period, the emphasis has come on relatively fewer but major images made in niches. These are isolated from others and are not made in crowded groupings. The northern style of the shikhara and the treatment of the sculpture suggest affinities to the temples of Alampur, which were made around the same time. Parts of present-day Andhra Pradesh state had come under the control of the Chalukyas in the 7th century. Here at Alampur are 9 temples called Nava Brahma temples in a later 16th century inscription. These were made at the end of the 7th or the early 8th century. 8 of these are made in the Nagara or northern style. These are among the finest temples of the Chalukyan period, and the most beautiful of them is the Svarga Brahma, constructed in the end of the 7th century in honor of a queen by her son. The exterior walls of the temple have latticed windows and niches containing deeply cut figures. The central niche has an image of the deity who is to be represented in that direction. The mithunas or loving couples are finely made on either side. They display the soft modelling and beauty of form which continues from the Gupta and post-Gupta period. The temples of Pattadakal are on the Malaprabha River, a few kilometers from Aihole. These mark the return of Chalukya temple patronage to Karnataka after several years of activity in the Andhra Pradesh region. The first great temple here is the Galagnatha, which is in the northern style and is similar to the Alampur temples. It is in the Virupaksha temple that we encounter the full glory of art under the early Chalukyas. The temple was built in 735 AD by Lokeshwari, a queen of King Vikramaditya II, to celebrate his victory over the Pallavas of Kanchipuram. It was probably modelled after the Kailashnath temple at Kanchipuram, which had greatly impressed the king. The Virupaksha would also have served as a model for the Kailashanatha temple built at Ellora by the Rashtrakutas, who succeeded the Chalukyas. The temple is the largest of this period. Its compound walls enclose a complex of 30 sub-shrines in the courtyard and a large Nandi Mandapa. Shiva rides on Nandi the bull, who is always found close to him. This pavilion housing Nandi was to become a continuing tradition in Shiva temples. The Virupaksha, along with the Kailashnatha at Kanchipuram, was probably the largest and most ornate temple in India at that time. The structures are all made of the local red sandstone and elaborately carved. The walls of the temple have 35 niches with images of Shiva.
The figures that are represented respect the, I would say, movements and proportions of human beings. But we have to understand that when it came to depicting gods, the purpose of art was not to portray the god just as an ordinary human being, but to take, I would say, elements of the human anatomy and charge them with a sublime and divine quality. And this sometimes gave them a very formal quality.
18 pierced windows serve to light the vast interior hall. The hall has 4 rows of pillars which divide the space into aisles. The interior of the Virupaksha temple presents a world of sumptuous carvings. Scenes from the epics are carved on the pillars. There are many figures in dynamic compositions. The work is miniaturized but extremely detailed. With light filtering in from windows and the distant doorway, the effect is dramatic.
These artists who worked, especially in Badami and Pattadakal, seem to have been attracted to an area of art which is somewhere between figural and somewhere between fantasy and floral. And so you have figures that dissolve into fantasy or into floral forms. You get this marvelous sort of fantastic world in which we have part circles, and inside the part circles you have figures, but they're dissolving into sort of floral forms, and no two are the same. So this inventiveness, this sort of infinite range of possibilities is something which we find in the sculptors, and it's something I think which is perhaps unsurpassed in the history of Indian carving.
The sanctum enshrines the Shivalinga, made of black stone. In the Indic tradition, deities are adored. They are offered fresh flowers, cool water, lamps, and incense. Mithunas or loving couples are auspiciously placed in the temple and the porches. They remind us always of the fruitfulness and of the harmony of nature. A shrine next to the sanctum has an image of Durga as Mahishasura, slaying the buffalo demon. There is a great naturalism in the nimble Durga, who stabs the Mahisha, whose only buffalo feature is his horns. Even in the midst of the drama of the moment, there is a marvelous sense of detachment, as she looks away and not at the demon. The Mahisha is on his knees, in a pose which conveys as much reverence as defeat.
The fact that sculptors can portray and communicate to the onlooker, to the devotee, that the gods inhabit a world beyond activity and aggression. It's something which we can meditate on. How they do it, of course, is one of the miracles of art, but something to do with the way in which the face is treated, the eyelids are lowered, it's the softness of the modeling of the features of the face, as well as the swelling, the sort of fullness of the body, and this sort of compression of form that we have in Indian art, I think is always something very noticeable in this period. It makes it one of the great highlights of the history of Indian sculpture.
The sculptural figures are dynamically posed. This vitality and movement is seen in the 8th century in temple art across many parts of India, including Tamil Nadu, Rajasthan, and Orissa. Dwarapalas seen here have a remarkable similarity with those of early Chola temples 150 years later.
One of the attractive, and I would say characteristic aspects of early Chalukya sculpture in the 7th and 8th centuries is the fact that figures are represented in various activities, because they are depicting gods in their various incarnations. And sometimes these activities are quite violent or, quite aggressive, but always the faces are detached.
The Mallikarjuna temple was made by Trailoka Mahadevi, also a queen and the sister of Loka Mahadevi, who built the Virupaksha temple. It is also made in the Dravid style of South India. It is similar to the Virupaksha, though smaller and not very well preserved. Of the 4 temples with Nagara Shikharas, the largest by far is the Papanatha. It was probably made after the Virupaksha in the early 8th century. The richly decorated interiors continue traditions of the Deccan. Further south, in Tamil Nadu, temple interiors remained starkly unadorned till a much later date. Ceiling panels are the distinctive and among the most beautiful features of the early Chalukyan temples. This Nataraja, or Shiva as a cosmic dancer, is seen on the ceiling of the Mallikarjuna temple. This fine Shiva depiction is on the ceiling of the mandapa of the Papanatha temple. This feature was taken up in the later temples of Rajasthan and Orissa. By the period of the early Chalukyas in the Deccan, the Indian temple was fully developed. On its outer walls and in the sacred interior were depictions of great beauty and grace. In Indian thought, the moment of the aesthetic experience is considered to be akin to Brahmananda, or the final bliss of salvation itself. When we respond to the grace of creation presented to us in art, we come out of ourselves and experience a greater reality.
Thank you very much, Sunil, for an excellent screening. Ladies and gentlemen, before the modern world completely takes over, I would suggest that these regions of the Deccan should be visited by all of you. It is an enchanted place. In fact, much of early culture seems to still hang in the air. The cotton grows in the fields, and sometimes you feel not so much has changed. I might mention that the best fresh figs I've ever eaten were at Badami. I might also mention that the last horse-driven tanga ride that I personally had was also at Badami. But these are marvelous places. There is early temples, there is exquisite sculpture, and there is the whole atmosphere where the bygone ages and those of today merge beautifully into one. As indeed all ancient art is supposed to. Because art is supposed to be a living truth. So it was made for the purpose of transforming us, and it is a living reality. And you see that in these places, particularly because many of these sites are a little remote. You leave the towns behind, leave behind the noise and clamor of the material world to enter these spaces where you can be with yourself and with the sculptures and temples. Now, if there are any questions I can answer, please put them in the chat box and Sujata will read them out. Thank you.
And before I do that, I'd like to announce our next screening. So if you would like to make a note of it, it's on a Saturday once again at 6 p.m. on May 25th. And this time we'll be going to Mamalapuram. The film is called Mamalapuram, Period of Transition between the ancient and medieval periods. So please do mark it in your calendar. We would love for you all to be with us next month. Krishna Burli has a comment to make. What lively images. Benoy, thank you for your painstaking depiction in detail.
Thank you so much, Krishna. Thank you for your warm attention.
Manju Goel, there was a figure with distinct Egyptian look. Will you comment?
Well, all I can say is that there are figures in ancient Indian art that often remind you of people from Egypt and other places. I do not just now remember the particular figure that you are mentioning, but generally speaking, yes, there was an enormous amount of trade taking place in the ancient period. In fact, even in the BC period, there were some Greek devotees who were patronizing pillars in Buddhist temples. There are colonies of Romans that have been found in the Eastern Deccan. So there was an enormous amount of movement that is taking place. You might recall that at the Konark Sun Temple, there's also a giraffe which is made. Thank you.
Radhika Kokate, I hope I have it right, the pronunciation. If not, apologies, please. She comments, very beautiful movie. Thank you so much for your research and the beautiful end result. Very blessed to be able to participate in the meeting.
Thank you very much for your kind comment. It is very much my pleasure. Thank you.
Kat Muir, sorry, that rolled up. Thank you very much for the movie.
Thank you for your comment. Thank you.
Radhika Kokate, how do you look at the art, especially those that have been damaged, and make the connections back to its historical and cultural root?
There is some art which is not so damaged, and as you say, there is some art which is damaged. And you see similar art of the same period around it. You know the art from the period before. You see the art which is to come. And these are the various connections that you try to make. But most of all, you respond to whatever that remains. It is an inner response which helps to guide you, which guides your eyes, which guides your heart of understanding. Thank you.
G. Naini, sir, again and again, we have seen in early building of temples no recognition of the Shilpi. What era they started making a name for themselves?
You're right that in the ancient period there is no name of the artist. And in fact, in the ancient period, in the early part of the ancient period, there's not even the name of the king who was ruling at that time. Even the king in his own inscriptions may mention Devanam Piya Piyadasi, one who is beloved of the divine, but he will not mention his name. And these, I think, are the most beautiful and the most important part of the Indian tradition of understanding. This is the humility with which we must rise, the humility with which we leave behind the concerns of the material world, the humility which helps us to awaken us, to open our eyes to that which may be more true and more eternal. And in the case of the Indian tradition, it is not only written about, but you see it in practice. As you're pointing out, in the ancient period, there are no names of the artists. In somewhere in the late medieval period, names start appearing of the artists. Thank you.
Manju Goel, it had a wide hairstyle like we see in the Egyptian paintings.
Right, right. I think I know what you mean. And indeed, the range of hairstyles that you see from the early BC, from the BC period, 2nd century BC period onwards, through the paintings of Ajanta of the 5th century. And as you see here, the range of hairstyles is actually quite amazing. It is very surprising that so much attention was paid to hairstyles. I'm personally very surprised. Hairstyles of men also quite flamboyant, so many of them. And the range, I'm sure the range would also have been influenced by contact with people from other cultures, but much of it would be indigenous. And it is really something to be seen that there is so much interest taken in both a range of jewelry and in hairstyles. Thank you.
Arun Bhargav, great pictures. Thank you, Benoy. Are there guided art tour packages available to these temples? If not, it will be a good idea for tour operators of India.
That is an excellent idea, Arun. And because I don't think there is any serious guided art tour packages. In fact, one of the things which I believe should be there is that the guides who are there should also be given training, should also be exposed to as much good learning as possible, to as much good knowledge about the background of these places, knowledge about the art, knowledge about the philosophic content, and that really should be done. In the meantime, I'm trying to make my own small contribution in the field by putting all these programs on a YouTube channel. And I hope that this corpus will prove useful in years to come. Thank you.
Lloyd Matthias, that was a lovely movie. Thanks for the wonderful summary and explanation, Benoy. Why are the Pattadakal, Aihole, and Badami monuments at Bagalkot and the relatively close by Gol Gumbaz at Bijapur so under-promoted as tourist destinations when compared to even Hampi in the same state?
Indeed, indeed, you are so right. For one thing, of course, it is the whims of tourist operators and tourism. Once a tourist destination is established and infrastructure has grown around it, it tends to perpetuate itself again and again. And it is not the knowledge of history or the knowledge of art which is what people are trying to promote. They're trying to make a living and more of a living. So that's the main aspect of it. And the other is that Hampi is a spread out and spectacular site. These are uh, these are temples with exquisite art. It needs more attention. You need somebody to, as we were saying earlier, point it out to you. It needs a little bit of self-development to respond to the quality of the art. And yes, that is an area in which we should look. In fact, there should be much more that is done to promote the qualities of the art, to promote not just the most obvious the fact that some temple is tall or some temple is grand, but what is deeper and the historical evolution. Indeed, there should be much more understanding which is promoted. Thank you.
Krishna Burli, they used to do, in quotes, by Vishnu Prerane and for Vishnu Prityartha, meaning instigated by God and to please God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is, yes, it is all of life that is meaningful is instigated by the divine, and it would please the divine. Thank you so much, Krishna, for always having the words to point us to the most important things of the soul. Thank you.
Dipankar Mukhopadhyay, thank you for showing these temples and carvings with narration. Not much time left to make a personal visit to these places.
Well, what matters is the journey of the spirit. And indeed, you are a person who makes much, much beautiful journeys of the spirit. I think would be very, very deeply enriched by that. Thank you.
Kiran, beautifully done film, much appreciated. Would like to know that this temple art is not only religious purpose but creative artwork as well. And this creative urge has kept historical facts alive. Thank you for sharing.
Yes, indeed, Kiran. The very purpose of the art as spelled out in the ancient treatise of art making is to help in revealing the grace which underlies creation. The very purpose is to help us in our journey towards the understanding of the divinity that we can find within ourselves, to search for divinity. Therefore, there is no difference between this this creativity. What is the creativity? The creativity is as inspired by an understanding, as inspired by a response to the truth. Therefore, inspiration, therefore, creative. And a sharing of that creativity helps to awaken that inspiration within the viewer. So it's all a wonderful process of inspiration shared. And it is a process in which we are able to see more than there is just in what is the optical reality or the various materialistic concerns that we have, to take us into something which is more satisfying, something which is more joyous. Thank you.
Are these temples working temples or just monuments?
These are almost all of them monuments.
Radhika Kokate asking, what is your YouTube channel?
It is simply called Benoy Behl.
I think that's about it. I can't see any more questions.
My thanks again to Sunil and my thanks to India Habitat Center once more for these wonderful opportunities, and to Sujata Chatterji here, who makes it possible for me to do all that I do. Thank you so much.